Welcome to the Daily Dawg podcast. It is Game Week 3, Tennessee week, and this is your Friday podcast. We are counting down the days, and we have been counting down the days and working our way up to the game tomorrow in Neyland Stadium, 3:30. Georgia taking on Tennessee. This is the first SEC game for both teams. This is the first road game for Georgia. So a lot at stake here. We've been talking about sort of the history of the series. We've done a little bit of a kind of breakdown. Who is Tennessee under Josh Heupel? Who is and what has happened with Tennessee and Kirby Smart when Kirby Smart and Josh Heupel have gotten together in this matchup over the last years. We've highlighted the fact that we are on an 8-game winning streak against Tennessee, and we're looking to make that a 9-game winning streak this year. I'd like to see it at least get to a 10-game winning streak, which means that if we did that, we would override the longest losing streak in the history of the series by one team or another, meaning that Georgia lost 9 straight games to Tennessee, starting when I was a freshman in college, and I had to endure the first 9 times we played Tennessee. We lost. So for me, this Tennessee rivalry means a lot, even though we've won 19 of the last 16, and we now have a fairly nice lead in the overall series, 29 games, 23 games, and 2 ties. So Georgia with 29 wins, Tennessee with 23 wins, and 2 ties in the series. It's never enough for me, and I just want to keep beating down Tennessee. I'd like to see us get to that 9th win this year in a row so that we at least match their longest win streak against us. And then if we can win again the next time we play, and maybe we're not going to play them next year. We won't know until we see how the new 9-game conference schedule comes together. Tennessee has a very likely chance of not being our 3rd permanent rival, along where Florida and Auburn, of course, will be. So if we can get that 9th win, that may just be where it sits for a while until it's time for us to come back together. So I put together some show notes. I promised that what we would do now as we get to these last 2 days of podcasts, we'll have the podcast today, and then we'll have the podcast on Saturday. Contemplating whether or not I might do a Sunday podcast. I prefer to take Sunday off and just sort of absorb my thoughts, go back over the game, read all the materials, maybe even rewatch it, all things that I do each and every big game. But for a game like this, there'll be so much enthusiasm and so much discussion. I might come back on Sunday, but you'll know. You'll get an email saying there's been a new podcast posted. I'm sorry, this one is so late. We've been working on trying to set up video podcasting and taking this out to a YouTube channel as well, so that you can enjoy, for whatever that's worth, watching me talk to you as I go through my show notes and put together all this information so that we can be ready to come and bring you these breakdowns, this information, this historical look back. And we've done a lot of that this week, but I promised what we would do today and tomorrow is we would start working our way through breaking down the matchups and take a good look at, build towards a prediction. I'm not big on predictions in a sense. I mean, those who know me will tell you that and who I've been interacting with for years relative to Georgia games, I will eventually come up with what I think. I'll put a number on it. I'll put a score, and I'll say what I think it's going to be. I'll tell you, though, I'm horribly biased. So every time it comes down to a 50-50 look, and I think, well, these 2 things are favorable to Georgia. These two things favor our opponent. So it's a 50-50 toss-up. I pretty much always think Georgia's going to pull it out, or at least I can't get past my optimism. So, but I will, what I like to do actually, my sense of how to predict these games is to break them down a little bit more, look at them a little bit sort of almost what I would say mathematically or logically, and look at what the possible outcomes are. So we're going to talk about that. But first and foremost, what I wanted to do is go back. I promised you, I think matchups, when we look at this, I guess as we break this down, there's basically 3 key matchups in teams versus teams. And this will seem very obvious, but it's kind of good to just take a moment and think about it as we go through the exercise. So you have offense versus defense, right? So a matchup in this game is going to be the Tennessee offense, vaunted offense, year in and year out since Josh Heupel took over. They're considered one of the best offenses in the league, in the country. They've put up a lot of points on average and a lot of yardage. So it's true they average close to 40 points a game since Josh Heupel took over, and they average about 450 or more yards a game. That puts them in the top 25 or so most years offensively, maybe even higher. A couple times I think they've been in the top 5, top 10. So we'll take a look. So that's their offense. Well, what is Georgia's signature? Well, no matter what we've done, Georgia's signature, and I think this is because Kirby Smart is played defense. He's a defensive coach. He was a defensive coach at Alabama. His expertise really lies in the defense, and so we always think of Georgia as being a defense-focused team, and we've had great defenses. So the matchup here, Tennessee offense versus Georgia defense, because the Georgia defense is really what leads the team, no matter how good the offense is. We had last year or two, we've had some offenses, well, maybe not last year or two, last 3 or 4 years, we've had some offenses that were really great. And we turned around and we looked and said, well, this might be a year. Carson Beck's first year, the offense still really did a great job, put up a lot of points, put up a lot of yardage. And that was a year we thought the defense would be in transition. And everybody kind of came in and said the defense is going to have to maybe take a back seat this year to the offense. I don't know if that's ever really true at Georgia, but so that's the primary matchup, right? The Tennessee offense, that's their calling card, versus the Georgia defense. That's our calling card. So that matchup is going to mean a lot. But that's not the only game, right? Now, the Georgia offense is going to go out there against the Tennessee defense. So we got to consider that. And then both teams have special teams. They have coach. I kind of lump coaching and intangibles and special teams all together into one sort of other batch of matchups. So when I want to break down one of these games, that's how I want to look at it. So I want to look at these sort of 3 phases and see where it comes together. So we're going to take a look at that. But the first thing I think we have to do is back up a little bit. One of the things I wanted to do earlier in the week is put a little perspective on, and it had the podcast started more, and we had a longer preseason time. We kind of jumped in game week 1 with the Marshall game, and we just started rolling with these podcasts. So we already had stuff to talk about. We talked a little about history. We talked a little about where Georgia is and where Georgia needs to be this year, but we didn't take a lot of time to kind of go back over state of the team and all break it down in all little pieces. So what I want to do is take a look at where the defense has been, because I think everybody knows, but we're going to put some numbers to it so we can have some perspective, and it'll help us look at where things go from here as we watch throughout the season. We know, generally speaking, the defense took a step back last year. And honestly, the defense had taken a step back a little bit the year before. So if you take 2 steps back, now you're a lot further back than you wanted to be, right? So, and the run game last year took a big step back. We were very disappointed with how the run game went. And the run game probably took a bigger step back than the defense. But let's take a look at those real quick, because those are going to matter. And those are going to give us a little bit of perspective as we look. Because when we're trying to break down these matchups, here's one of the problems early season. We've talked about this already. We're going to try and break down this matchup between the Tennessee offense and the Georgia defense, but both of those we have 2 games worth of data to look at. And even if they had both played fantastic teams, let's say they played equally matched middle of the table SEC teams. Let's say they both played let's say Georgia played Kentucky and South Carolina, and let's say Tennessee had played Arkansas and Ole Miss. Okay, so we would say those weren't the same teams. I mean, it'd be a lot to ask for if they both play the same teams. Like, I'll play Ole Miss this week, and then I'll play Ole Miss next week. Or no, you play Ole Miss this week, I'll play Ole Miss next week, and you play Arkansas next week, and I'll play them this week. I mean, that doesn't work out very well. So let's just say they both played, like I said, sort of middle of the table SEC teams that are good, solid, and that you're not going to run over, and that could be a challenge. And that's what they'd both play by now. We'd still only have 2 games worth of data. So we would feel that that's more instructive than Tennessee playing Syracuse and East Tennessee State, and Georgia playing Marshall and Austin Peay, because those teams aren't on our level. They're not, and those teams aren't on Tennessee's level. So we're not really sure what we're seeing when we watch them perform, but we're going to try and look at that and see. So there's only so deep we could go with this. But even if they had played SEC teams, we would still only have 2 games of data. So that would be like if we're looking in baseball, and as a giant Braves fan, I'm sure a lot of you are, let's say that we're saying, hey, Ronald Acuna is MVP this year. He's batting .500 and he's slugging 1,500. You say, wow, that's amazing. You say, yeah, there's been 6 games. You say, well, 6 games, 162 games in the season. It's way too early to start saying, he's MVP. He's like, yeah, but he's off to a great start. So he is, that would be off to a great start, but it's still like, well, okay, that's 1 week. He could have a terrible week next week, and then he would be below average, depending on how terrible it was. So, but what I want to do is, let me pull out my notes here. We're going to take a look at the defense. The defense has taken kind of a step back. So I'm just looking at the last 4 years, and I keep looking at that because, as you know, if you listened all week, Josh Heupel has been at Tennessee for 4 years, which is a pretty good amount of data. And so we're mostly comparing what Georgia has done in the last 4 years and what Tennessee has done in the last 4 years. We don't really care what Tennessee did before Josh Heupel got there. They were a completely different team. So, and so then comparing what Georgia did 7 years ago to what Tennessee did 4 years ago wouldn't make any sense either, right? So we're looking at 4 years, 4 years. So, and then what we can glean from what we have so far this year. So, okay. So the Georgia defense in 2021, first championship season, they had to play 900. They played 969 plays. They were on the field for. They allowed a total of 4,019 yards, which was a average of 4.15 yards per play. And as it worked out in the game, they were giving up 267.9 yards a game. So they came back next year, and that was an elite defense. Okay, everybody said, "Wow, that's generationally good defense." They were arguably even a better defense by points allowed per game when you look at it in 2021. But and the defense, well, either way, point is defense was still great in 2022. Okay, so they came back in 2022. They were on the field for 912 plays. They gave up 4,451 yards, so about 400 more yards over the course of the whole season, played the same number of games, 15 games. That was an average of 4.88 yards a play. So they were giving up 0.7 yards a play, almost a yard a play more. Not quite, less than a yard a play, but, moving up there. And that resulted in 296 yards a game that they gave up. Then in 2023, they actually managed to only have to cover 849 plays. So that's pretty great. They went back down to 4,017 total yards. So now some of this, the total is, well, we played less games. They played 14 games, 13 or 14 games in the 2023 and 2024 season. So part of what happens when you go to the national championship game, win it, you play the most number of games, right? So they did go tightened up a little bit. They only allowed 4.77 yards a play and 289 yards a game. And again, when as a fan, throughout all of my time as a data junkie and college football fan, first stat I want to look, just like in baseball, the first thing you want to see is you talk about is somebody a real power, a good hitter. Well, are they hitting close to 300? And can they hit at least 20 home runs in a season, right? Well, in college football on defense, you'd want to say, can they hold teams under 300 yards? I mean, if you could hold them down around 200 yards, that's fantastic. And there are sometimes you see some teams that, held teams to 250 yards or less in the season. That's amazing. Again, the 2021 team, 267.9 yards a game. That's fantastic. That's elite. Okay. So as you creep up to 289 yards a game, you're still under 300. Okay, you're still under 300 yards a game, but you're creeping up there. You're closer to 300 than 250. So. So they had less total yards allowed than any season so far, but that's because they played a less game. But they did take the yards per play down a little bit, and they took the yardage down a little bit. So, but then you come to last year, and last year was a big change. Still about 915 plays. They allowed 4,618 yards. This was an average of 5.05 yards a play. So a much higher yard per play average. You're almost a full yard per play higher than your 2021 defense. And they allowed in the game, the way games flowed, they allowed 329.9 yards a game. Now, that's still top 35 defense. Okay. You look at a defense, you say and you look at some of the middle of the road SEC defenses, South Carolina, Kentucky, they're going to hover in this area a lot of years. They're going to be, and you'll hear them when we go play, you'll see the announcer say, hey, Georgia's playing South Carolina. South Carolina has a good defense. Okay. Good defense is 300, 330 yards, 300, anything under 335, I guess, is still, to 300 is still good. But you got to go under 300 to be elite. You got to be under 5 yards of play to be elite. You're over 5 yards of play. You're over 300. You're up around 330 yards. You're just a good defense. So we watched the Georgia defense step backwards from elite to just good last year. And that was disappointing. So this is one of the things we're really going to want to take a look at this year. We're going to go back and take one more look at what we've done so far this season in the two games we played. So only so much we can tell from the opponents, right? But we're still going to take a look at it and say, well, how did we do? And are we on track to be elite? We're going to look at Tennessee's offense too. Are they on track to be elite? And I know you kind of know the answer to that already, because Tennessee's made a lot of headlines by putting up 72 points last week. They're averaging 600 yards a game so far in the two games they're playing. They did put up 493 yards against Syracuse and over 700 yards against East Tennessee State. So it comes out to an average of like 606. So that's elite. What does that tell us? We'll talk about that with the competition in just a minute. But let's just sort of digest that for a moment, because this is a key concept that we're going to look at, is say, okay. And I think one of the things we know is going to have to happen, or what we want to see happen, is if, well, first of all, one of the reasons Georgia appeared not to be as elite a team last year as they had been is just what we looked at right there on defense. They were averaging giving up 30 or 40 more yards a game. They played roughly the same number of plays. They were giving up more yardage per play. This meant that teams stretched out their drives a little bit longer. We got the ball a little bit less. Everything kind of just, that complementary football just kind of falls apart when you don't have that kind of elite level on defense. Elite level of defense helps propel the whole thing. So that's a key concept. So we're going to think about that going forward. But one of the things we're really looking to see, and this is going to be our first real chance to see it, is when we play a really good offense, is our defense back to being elite? Well, we're going to find out now. Regardless of what happens in this game, regardless of how good Tennessee's competition has been so far, Tennessee is an elite offensive team. They're going to finish the season most likely in the top 20, 25, 30, maybe even the top 10 or 15 in offense. So we don't know, but they'll be an upper third offense. That's going to, so maybe it's too much to say elite, but they're going to end up the season being a very good offense. But with the Georgia defense, there's probably a deeper dive we have to go to, which is the run defense. And that's another area where we all saw that last year. The run defense just didn't, I mean, even if you just watched the games, you just had the feel, even without digging into the statistics, you had a pretty clear idea that it just didn't feel like we were as stout up front as we used to be. And we weren't. Let's dig into that real quick, just to break that down. In 2021, the defense, the run defense specifically, gave up 1,183 yards total, or 2.56 yards per carry for the opponent, and only 3 touchdowns. And that was an average of about 79 yards a game. In 2022, their opponents ran the ball 401 times for 1,155 yards, or an average of 2.88 yards a game. They scored 7 touchdowns and averaged about 77 yards a game. So solidly under 100 yards a game allowed in the rushing game on defense. In 2023, that dropped back a little bit, and you saw 422 opponent rushes for 1,591 yards, a 3.77 yard per carry average. So that's over almost 1.25 yards, or 1.2 yards more than the 2021 defense, and almost a full yard more than the 2022 defense. They also allowed 13 touchdowns a game, 13 touchdowns on the season, and opponents nearly averaged 114 yards a game during in the rush game, and that was in 2023. So last year, so there was a progression. We're working backwards as far as we pretty much were the standard we'd been for a number of years in 2021, 2022. Of course, those were the great defenses, led to the national championships along with the offense, complementary football, la la la. But that complementary football took a little bit of a hit in 2023 when you saw us all of a sudden now go from giving up 77 yards a game to over 104, about almost 115 yards a game. And then it took another step back in 2024. We gave up 1,815 yards to opposing teams, a 3.71 yard per carry average. So that was about the same as the year before. But now opponents have gained almost 130, 129.64 yards a game, basically 130 yards a game, and scored another 14 touchdowns. So you go back to 2021, less than 1,200 yards, less than 2.6 yards a carry, only 3 touchdowns for the whole season, under 100 yards. In fact, 78, 79 yards a game on average. By the time you get to 2024, that had eroded to over 1,800 yards. So 1,200 to 18, over 600 yards more allowed on the season. And with over 130 yards or almost 130 yards a game and 14 touchdowns, 11 more touchdowns opponents were able to score on the ground. So, and the ground game really makes a difference too. It's, you look at last year's team. Last year we had our lowest offensive both yardage and point total we'd had in the last 4 or 5 years. And that kind of goes hand in hand. When you allow other teams to rush the ball, this is what we're trying to do to other teams. We're trying to run the ball consistently and throw mix, but when we run the ball consistently and effectively, then we're able to score when we need to score when we want to score, but limit the amount of time our defense has to be out there, sort of shorten the game so that other teams are out there fighting against a very good, balanced Georgia offense. Georgia's putting up 30-something points a game, and then they're coming out against this really incredible defense, and they get less opportunities. They maybe only get 8 or 9 or 10 drives, maybe 11 drives in a game, instead of in some games you might get 13, 14, 15. And we talked about this a little bit earlier in the week relative to Tennessee's philosophy of how they play football, with the speed which they run their offense and with the way their offense runs and is big play oriented. Even when they have a very athletic, a very good, a high quality SEC defense, they are more likely to give up more yards and points in a season than ours would because they play more snaps. I think I pointed this out already this season. Their defense has played 40 more snaps than ours in just 2 games. Our defense is averaging playing about 50 snaps a game. They've already played almost a game compared to what we're averaging. They've almost played a game more snaps in 2 games. So if this keeps up as they go through a 12-game season, they're almost doubling snaps compared to the Georgia defense every 2 games. That means they're going to play 5 or 6 games worth of snaps more than our defense. That is more likely to lead to more injuries. That's more likely to tire out your defense, wear them out. Even if you end up getting more sacks, more turnovers, more tackles for loss, you're still playing more snaps. So you're going to have to do more all the time to keep up with that momentum. So really, when you look at the Georgia defense, it's just a big difference there. What they did. I mean, the overall numbers. You slip from 270 yards of defense allowed, or all yards of offense allowed on defense, and about 4.15 yards of play all the way back in 2021. That's your high water mark. And you're kind of working backwards to last year. You allowed 5.05 yards of play, just over 5 yards of play, but almost 330 yards a game. So you just kind of had been working your way backwards. And most of that loss is on defense. Mostly the pass defense has been pretty consistent through that time. Sometimes we're a little more sack oriented, sometimes we're not. And Kirby's never really made sacks a priority. We do rush the passer, and a lot of the best games you can remember. You think about Texas last year; it just felt like we were sacking the Texas quarterback every few minutes. Actually, the Tennessee game last year felt like we were sacking Nico all the time in the game. So, but on a grand scale, you don't see Georgia typically. Maybe once every 5 years, we're up in that upper 20, upper 10, 20 teams in the country in terms of sack leaders. That's usually not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is play balanced defense across the line. We're trying to affect the quarterback, is what you hear Kirby saying. We're trying to collapse the pocket, but keep him in the pocket. We're more interested in making him move, what they say, off schedule, throw the ball faster than he wants to. That's one of the things we talked about earlier this week that is one of the reasons the Tennessee offense seems to struggle so much against the Georgia defense. The Georgia defense is very effective against the Tennessee offense, getting pressure against their line without having to overcommit guys to get a pass rush. If we had to overcommit and blitz our cornerbacks or our linebackers just to get pressure on Tennessee, then they would have these these matchup problems on the outside where they put the receivers way to the outside, and they would end up one on one. And if they caught the ball and broke away, then boom, it's a long play, it's a bust, right? So one thing I hadn't talked about, but is true, I heard somebody else say it on another podcast, and it's true. Tennessee is, when you think of these spread offenses and these high power offenses, you think about guys who throw the ball around all the time. But actually, where we are so effective against Tennessee has been, even though our run defense has been degrading over the last couple of years and culminating in the worst season we had last year. And again, let me just say, 130 yards a game on rush defense is going to put you in the top 35 to 50. So you're still above average, okay? You're still an above average run defense. But we have seen our team build itself on elite defense, right? And elite defense starts by dictating what you want the other team to do. So the first thing we do is we take away the run, then the other team can't run. So they're forced to throw. And when they're forced to throw more than they're comfortable with, they're more likely to make more mistakes. Plus, when they're forced to throw, that's when we are able to start cranking up the pressure. So we're not trying to, pass rush every play, but now we know that they've established they can't run the ball. So now we can start designing how we're going to keep their quarterback in the pocket, but affect him, get to him, get him off schedule, possibly sack him. So you really see our defense sort of start to tee off in a way. It's almost like you see the momentum coming and you can tell it's building. And a lot of times that starts with establishing that stopping the run. Well, we weren't able to consistently do that the last two seasons, especially last year, as much as we would have liked. However, against Tennessee, we were able to. Our defensive scheme and our overall athleticism still allows us to play them straight up without having to overcommit people into one area or another, so that we can still get pressure, affect the quarterback, get him off schedule. And when you have to make even a short throw, one of the things that's true when they spread those wide receivers, like people might ask, well, if it's so effective to put your wide receivers out, sorry, I hit the microphone. If it's so effective to put your wide receivers way out to the sides like Tennessee does, why doesn't everybody do that? Well, you have to have a quarterback who can get the ball there. So Heupel is smart. I mean, he's been looking for quarterbacks, and he's had quarterbacks. You think about Joe Milton had a big arm, and Herndon had a big arm. And so you have to have a big arm quarterback, because even what's essentially a screen pass, but all the way out to the sideline, it still can be a 40-yard pass across the field. So, you may not be throwing it that far downfield, but you're throwing it a long way, and that ball has to get there quickly. If the ball doesn't get there quickly, then they don't have the matchup. If you float the ball way out to the outside, and then, an athletic defense has a chance to get out there, even if you catch it, they may just knock you out of bounds right there at the sideline for a 1 or a 2 yard gain. And that is what's often happening for Tennessee against Georgia. So one of the things we're going to concentrate on or want to really see this week, we've talked about what do we want to see each of the last couple of weeks. Well, this is where we're really going to see it. We're playing a real offensive team now, a team with real talent. And are we going to be able to get pressure on the quarterback? Are we going to be able to make them throw when they don't want to? Are we going to be able to stuff the run game just with our front seven, just our people up front, without having to overcommit? And our cornerbacks and our defensive backs going to be able to cover the Tennessee wide receivers? And that's what we're looking for. Now, one of the things that we're happy to see so far, and this is a little bit like, and I think in many ways you've seen a lot of momentum right now towards Tennessee this week. There's just a lot of more. I'm sorry, I was trying to pull up the stats I wanted to read to you. There's a lot of momentum. I would say somewhere between 60 and 70% of the media and the personalities out there seem to be gravitating or moving towards Tennessee in terms of their predictions for this year, which is fine. That's great. I mean, I think it's certainly more interesting. I've talked about that a lot already this year. In some ways, when you just play from the front and you're in front the whole time, meaning you start the season number one and you are a heavy favorite in every game you play, even when you're playing rivals, even when we played Tennessee a couple of years ago and we're winning by 25, 30 points in that game, and we come in as a 19-point favorite or something like that, it makes the Tennessee game sort of like the Austin Peay game that we just played. Like, you expect to win. You don't wake up on Saturday morning wondering what's going to happen and thinking this could be a big deal. This is it. What's going to happen this season? Let's get up in the morning. Let's see. We have to get past this game or our season, might turn south. we hadn't had that feeling back in 2021 and 2022 and even 2023. We steamrolled through those opponents, and I think you get kind of used to it. And so now we're back in a place where it's like, hey, this is exciting. We don't know what's going to happen. This is going to be fun. So we don't know. But what we have seen so far, our defense has played really well. Okay. Now, level of competition, but this is the same trend. I guess what I was starting to say is, look, there's been a lot of momentum towards Tennessee. The media is thinking this is Tennessee's year. Georgia's on the road. A lot of that has to do with Gunnar Stockton. They're looking at Gunnar Stockton, and nobody believes in Gunnar Stockton. You hear people saying Gunnar Stockton's making his first road start of the year. This is going to be a big deal. I just don't know if he's up to this. The Tennessee offenses look great. The Georgia offense hasn't looked great. Sure, the Georgia defense is still athletic, and it's true. Look, right now, the defense is a no-name defense. In other words, we don't have those obvious stars coming into the season this year that everybody's looking at and say, okay, here's your next great pro or your next 5 great pros that are coming off the Georgia defense. They're there as far as talent. When you look at the recruiting, when you look at the guys we brought in, the guys have been developed. Dylan Everett is a guy who it projects to be an NFL guy, and there's a lot of enthusiasm about. There's plenty of talent. Like, if these guys develop and if they have the season that we hope and think they'll have, then there's going to be plenty of names on the board. Don't worry about it. There'll be plenty of guys to go, and if not this year, if they still have eligibility and want to come back, if not this year, next year. But this is a time where it's not as clear, like when Jordan Davis was on the line and Jalen Carter was a backup, or you had all those guys that, and last year we came in, everybody knew Mikael Williams, and Jalen Walker came on, and he was a name that people were looking at and thought he could do really well. And then he had a great season, maybe arguably better than Mikael Williams. So they both win in the first round. So yeah, there's not those guys right now. Not that there's not those guys talent wise. Gabe Harris might be just like those 2 guys at pass rush. We got some other guys that are coming on. Jordan Hall has been on the team for a lot of people compared him to Jordan Davis when we recruited him, and it hasn't developed yet, but he is playing and starting now. And you don't hear a lot about the nose guard and the guys on the 3 get down linemen as much, because if they're doing their job, they're eating up blocks and allowing the linebackers and the pass rushers to get in there and cause havoc. The big guys up front often don't get a lot of press on their own. Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter were so amazing that because of the athleticism, but you may see that, as the season goes on, you may see Jordan Hall get more and more attention if he makes some special plays and shows off his athleticism. Other guys that are there, are still, have the chance to be great players. But what we've seen so far is we've seen discipline, we've seen a lack of penalties, we've seen discipline, we've seen them be on their assignments, and we've seen almost no movement. Marshall, like we talked about, didn't even get had 1 first down in the first half, and only a couple first downs in the whole game. Barely got anywhere. You go back and look at Austin Peay. We gave them the 1 field goal of the 6 points they got. We gave them the 1 field goal by fumbling the ball inside a field goal range, and the defense created a 3 and out. And actually, both turnovers last week, the defense created 3 and outs. So one of those led to Austin Peay having to punt because they weren't able to try a field goal, and the other one led to them getting a field goal because they were already in field goal range, and they had a field goal kicker who could kick a 40-something or a field goal. So they did well with that. So the defense really, that's another thing you want to see. Like, the defense on what they call those quick changes, turnover. They went out there and they shut down the other team. Again, it's just Austin Peay, but it's still pretty good when you give up turnovers from the 50 in and you give up only 3 points, the points that were basically already there because they were close enough to kick the field goal. They either went backwards or gained no yards and kicked the field goal. So then they did drive, for their other field goal. So they did drive and then got all the way down to our goal line and then went for it on 4th down and then got stuffed. So we did see 2 drives from Austin Peay. And really the bulk of the yards that they gained in the game, they only gained, I think 197 yards in the game. And the bulk of those came on 2 drives. All the rest of the drives were basically 3 and outs. So the defense didn't give up a lot of penalties for first downs either. So they're playing discipline. They're shutting down the run. They're shutting down the pass. They've only given up 6.5 points a game. So they gave up the one touchdown against Marshall late in the game. Their third quarterback came in and went 6 of 7 against our fourth string and not even on the depth chart guys. And again, I'm not look, not sour grapes. That's what they're supposed to do. But when our starters and second and even mostly third team was in the game, Marshall barely got first downs. When we got to so deep in the roster that guys were getting opportunities where they probably got dressed and didn't even might not even tied their shoes because they never expected to get in the game, they were in the game, and Marshall was able to get a touchdown. So nobody's really scored against our first string defense. So maybe even our first and second string defense. So right now, the Georgia defense is playing as well as we could ask it to. It's done the assignment that it's had in front of it. They have played with passion and energy and fire, like Kirby's asking them to do, and they have really just they've followed the assignment, and they look like they're ready to step up. I can't point to, or it's going to be harder to say who the stars are going to be, because we're waiting for new guys to emerge. It's not obvious. There's not as many guys that NFL scouts are already drooling over, but as the season goes on, it might be. So that's the question. Is this defense going to continue progressing and become another great Georgia defense? And one thing you can look at is even last year, Georgia was not able to be as dominant in the games that they played on defensively against other teams. So I'm just taking a look. So last year, we actually, it's kind of funny, we were more dominant in some of the better games. Like we started against Clemson, and we often just do great when we have these bigger teams to start at the first of the year. It does always feel like we sleepwalk a little bit through these cupcake games early on. And that, we may see the focus hopefully come when we play Tennessee this week. But against Clemson last year, they gave up less than 200 yards. Against Tennessee Tech, they held them to 134 yards. So that looked good. Okay, payday game, and you played really well. Kentucky had no offense, and neither did we. They were sub 300, but then Alabama torched us for 550 yards almost. But then they got in Auburn. Auburn was a good offensive team, but we held them to under 350, which is not bad. Mississippi State put up too many yards. Texas, of course, we crushed. But you get down to UMass 351 yards. So that was a game sandwiched between the Tennessee game and the Georgia Tech game. Now, of course, those were both big games, big rivals, super important to our progression into the playoffs. Maybe they took a week off, maybe they took some time off, but the same as what we're looking at here. What did we get out of seeing UMass? Well, you'd like to have thought UMass averaged 6.1 yards a play. Fortunately, we didn't give them the ball a lot. They only had 57 plays. So, but they did score. We scored 59 points, and we did it very quickly. Well, they had the ball enough to score 21 points. So they put 21 points on the board. They put over 350 yards up. Point being is our defense last year, and UMass was able to run the ball. That's what was really shocking. I mean, that's where they really hurt us. They ran for 226 yards against us, and that. In fact, I think that was the most of the. No, well, Georgia Tech, of course, which is our primary run team, and their quarterback even runs Haynes King is probably a good. When we get to the Georgia Tech game this year, you're probably going to see two quarterbacks that look a lot alike in Haynes King and Gunnar Stockton as far as their game, and maybe that's your best comparison to think about when you think about how. As we look at this Tennessee game and you think about, oh my gosh, Gunnar, I don't know. I mean, yes, he's run the ball well and he's doing these RPOs, but it doesn't look like we have a lot of downfield passing. Well, did Haynes King not look dangerous last year? I mean, Haynes King ran the ball and he threw the ball and he kind of did it all, and it just was hard to stop. And I think, when you think about how you felt as a fan watching what he did to our defense, I think you could get a little more insight into thinking Gunnar at his best might be a guy that really scares the other team's defenses and scares their fans. They may look at him and say, are we ever going to stop this guy? I wouldn't be surprised if we see Gunnar be a guy that just completely maddens the other team's fans when they think, okay, we got him, it's 3rd and 6, and then he scrambles out of it and gets a 10-yard gain. And you're like, gee whiz, we covered everybody. We got the rush in there. He couldn't pass the ball. We should have sacked him, but he gets away and he gets a first down. I think that we're going to see a lot of that this season. So, yes, we'd all like to see, just like the days that we're used to where you drop back, rip a pass over the middle to a wide open receiver like Ladd McConkey running down the middle of the field for 35 yards on 3rd and 6. But and we may do some of that this year, but okay. So let's get back to where we started real quick and wrap up those concepts. So the Georgia defense had taken a step back over the last couple of years. And our primary concern is, how is the Georgia defense going to do against the Tennessee offense? And the answer is, we don't have a ton of people right now that we can point to and say these are guaranteed NFL superstars, but you can point to them and say these were super highly touted guys that everybody in the country wanted, and they look like they've developed into the system that we play, and they're executing the way we expect them to. And I think by the end of the year, there are going to be those guys that have become household names on defense. So, and the track record is there, right? I mean, even when we've stepped back, like I said, last year was the worst defense you've seen since the very beginning of the Kirby Smart era, in terms of we gave up over 20 points a game, right at about 20 something points a game. We gave up 330 yards a game, and we gave up 130 yards rushing. These are still upper third defensive numbers in college football. So we weren't elite. We weren't even very good or excellent. We were just good. And what also hurt last year is our offense was also only just good. So you didn't see that dominance and that game control we're used to, and you felt it. You felt other teams being able to run the ball up the middle. You saw UMass run for 225 yards against us. You saw Georgia Tech run for 260 yards. We'd gone seasons, 2 seasons in a row or more, where we didn't give up 200 yards rushing to anybody. So that felt different. You saw teams score at a higher level because they did, because instead of scoring 12, keeping teams to an average of 12 to 15 to 16 points a game, we held teams to just under 21 points last year. You felt like games were closer because they were, because instead of scoring 38 to 40 points a game like we had the previous 3 or 4 years, we were averaging about 30, 31 points a game last year. So we were averaging 31 to 20, and we were averaging, allowing teams to, in fact, this is what's really shocking, is the combination of our run game being off on offense and our defense giving up more runs. We actually lost the run game last year. Our offense only produced 1,742 yards rushing last year, or 4.06 yards a carry. We allowed 1,815 yards. So we got outgained on the season by our opponents. And we averaged 125, almost 125 yards a game, but our opponents averaged almost 130. We did score 24 touchdowns rushing, and our opponents only scored 14. So we still controlled that aspect of the game a little bit more, but we lost the run game. We lost ground defensively to what we're used to, and we lost the run game compared to even just mano-a-mano. Our opponents put up more yards than we did, and that's shocking. It really is. And on that note, we also ran the ball a lot less because we were less effective. I'm sure the coaches dialed up less running plays. We only ran the ball. Like I said, well, I don't have the number of carries on here, but I think we only ran the ball about 400 and something times, compared to normally we average about 500 yards. I mean, 500 carries or so a season. So we ran the ball 80 to 100 times less on the season, because I'm sure that Bobo and Kirby and everybody was looking at it and they saw a less effective ground game, so they went to the air more. And we saw that too, and that leads to a lot less game control. So let's try to put this together. What does this mean? All right. Tennessee's offense, Georgia's defense, that's the prime matchup. Georgia's defense is playing better even against the lesser teams than we saw some of last year early on. It's not much of a sample size, but we see them doing everything they should be doing, holding teams to very few to no scores, 6 points a game right now. Holding teams, they're averaging giving up just over 200 yards a game. So they're clamped down. They're averaging giving up less than 70, 80 yards a game rushing right now. So we're locked in on defense. Now, it's early. I know we've said that over and over again, but we can only look at what we can look at. And what we can see right now is that we've given up 123 yards in 2 games. So, 61 yards a game rushing. And like I said, about 200 yards a game total. So excellent. And the yard, we're at 3.91 yards per play average. So how would that compare? in 2021 for the season, we were 4.15. So against these cupcakes, we were performing better than the 2021 defense. But again, cupcakes. But that's what you want to see. You want to see them excel, right? Okay, so what's the Tennessee offense done? Well, we've already covered that. They're averaging 600 yards a game. They're scoring close to 40 points or over 40 points a game just on the two games. So they have excelled. So what now the question is, which one do we believe in, right? Which one's real? Which one's not? How do we know which one do we think we're going to see out there? I guess what I would say is that Georgia, though I can't tell you these superstar names that we're used to seeing, the Jalen Carters and the Keely Ringos and the Malachi Starks, I can't point to as many of those outside of Dylan Everett. But, well, CJ Allen. CJ Allen is a star in the making, okay? I mean, he's going to be another great linebacker. And our defensive backs in general, KJ Bolden, he's young, but this is a guy who's going to be a highly sought after. So our defensive backs, safeties, cornerbacks, they're all great, but they're all young. Same thing across the line. The people at the line, and even CJ Allen, they haven't emerged yet at linebacker because they were behind other people. So, but these are guys who are they were high-level recruits. They've been showing promising games when they had the chance leading up to this, and now it's their turn. And they're in a system where they seem to be performing as we would expect them to. So the Tennessee offense, by comparison, similar, okay? Joey Aguilar stepping in as the new quarterback, much discussion about that. You know the story. Nico left, NIL wanted more money. They wouldn't give it to him. So basically, in the weirdest situation you could imagine, Joey Aguilar swaps places and leaves UCLA after Nico comes there to come back to Tennessee. And he looks like he's doing great. Right now, you know, Joey Aguilar is putting up, let's see, what's he doing? For the season so far, he's 39 of 59, so he's averaging 66% passing, 535 yards, over 9 touchdowns or 9 yards an attempt, which is great. Anything over 9 and up is in the elite category. 5 touchdowns and no interceptions. But the question is this Joey Aguilar or is this who he's playing? Okay, because Joey Aguilar is not a guy. He came to Tennessee. He went to UCLA, but UCLA is a program in trouble. Okay, they needed anybody. We could have had Joey Aguilar. We were looking at quarterbacks, and it's been publicized. I've talked about that, not necessarily because our coaches didn't believe in Gunner, but they do believe in competition. They do believe having more. We got Ryan Puglisi, looks like he could play if he needed to behind Gunner, and then behind him you've got a walk-on and a true freshman who just walked on campus. So, you know, the coaches know that they don't want to bet a season on that in the quarterback room. So they would have brought in another quarterback if they could. They looked at the Mendoza kid who had been in California, went to Indiana, and we talked about that. That wasn't necessarily because they don't believe in Gunner Stockton. They believe in competition, and they wanted to see, they wanted to see a better backup plan. They wanted to see 3 deep in the room, okay? And they've had that before, and they were looking for that. So they could have had Joey Aguilar. He was available before he went to UCLA, but we weren't interested, okay? A lot of teams weren't interested. UCLA wouldn't have been an elite destination. So I'm not trying to rip him, but let's just be honest. He was on App State last year. They went 5-6. He completed less than 56% of his passes. He averaged 7.7 yards an attempt, which is good, but not elite. He threw 23 touchdowns and 14 interceptions. I mean, that's a lot of interceptions. He was good. He moved the ball. He played well. He had one game against an elite team last year, if you can call them elite, the same Clemson team that we destroyed. It did make it to the playoffs, but then they lost and did not, they had backed their way into the playoff, as you might remember. So I don't know that this was the most high-powered Clemson game. Well, they played Clemson. App State played Clemson. They lost 66-20. Joey Aguilar was 18 of 41, 44%. For 214 yards and a touchdown. So a 5.2 yard per attempt average. So he was not elite. He wasn't terrible. He didn't throw an interception, but that's really the only high-level team they played last year. So the year before, he was a starter at App State the year before. They had a better season actually the year before, and he was actually better the year before. He threw for 3,700 yards the year before, almost 64%. He had 33 touchdowns against 10 interceptions, a much better touchdown to interception ratio. Maybe that team was better. I don't know enough about App State to know what happened. They did not play any high level teams. They played North Carolina is the only name brand team they played in that season. They lost 40-34, so they played them tough. He was decent in that game. He completed about 51% of his passes for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. So, I mean, look, I'm just looking through here and saying, look, let's see last year. What was Aguilar's worst game last year? He threw 4 picks in a loss to Louisiana. They lost 34-24. He was 20 of 42 for about a 48% completion percentage. He threw 3 touchdowns, but 4 interceptions. So, I mean, I'm sure Louisiana is, and an interesting thing, he really lit it up here against East Tennessee State University. They played East Tennessee State, I think last year, is it? I saw it somewhere. Anyway, they opened the season last year. App State did with East Tennessee State, and they won 38-10. So App State beat East Tennessee State 31-10. That was their cupcake opener. Okay, so that's what kind of team we're talking about here. He had 61% of his passes, 326 yards. This is one of the only games he went over 300. He had one other game against East Carolina where he went over 400, but this was his only other game over 300 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns. So he has been fantastic so far in his career against East Tennessee State University, both at App State and Tennessee. But so look, I'm not trying to rip Joey Aguilar. I'm just trying to say he's powering the Tennessee offense and doing what the Tennessee offense is designed to do. But Tennessee lost all of their top wide receivers last year, and they've replaced them. And they got at least one guy who was a 5-star recruit, and they're hoping for more out of him this year. They got a young tight end I mentioned before who's coming on, and they have a senior tight end who's made some plays in the past. And they have another guy. Their leading receiver right now is a guy, Brazel, I think. Brazel has been on the team for a while, and he looks like he could be emerging as like Jalen Hyatt or some of the other top receivers they have. But they lost their 3 top receivers, so they're all new receivers. They lost Dylan Sampson, who ran for over 1,500 yards and more than 20 touchdowns last year. And they have a committee at running back that includes 1 or 2 guys that were on the team last year and had a couple hundred yards. And they brought in a guy named Star Jones, I think is his name. They brought in a guy from Duke, who had been the running back at Duke before. So, again, this is not to disparage Duke. Duke's put up some good seasons in recent years. Okay, so Duke can play some ball, so it's not embarrassing to bring in Duke, a guy from Duke. Star Thomas is his name. I wasn't sure if Star Jones, Star Thomas. So Star Thomas has run for 161 yards so far, over 6 yards per carry. So he's looking good, and he transferred in from Duke. And let's just see what he did at Duke. Hold on. Last year at Duke, he had 871 yards. 7 touchdowns. He averaged 73 yards a game, and he ran for a 4.9 yard per carry average, which is good, but not great. No, I don't even know if it's good. It's adequate. It's good enough. Okay. I mean, we would be disappointed to see anybody less than a 5 or 6 yard per carry average consistently getting carries on our team. So now, again, the wide receivers, Joey Aguilar, Star Thomas, all these guys coming in from other teams. Maybe that's the difference between driving a Honda Civic and driving a Ferrari. Maybe when you get the keys to the Tennessee offense, you're driving a Ferrari. And so you can really spin that thing around the track because it's built for it. And the Honda Civic, there's only so much you can do with it. There's always that possibility that all these guys are better in the Tennessee offense with the Tennessee offensive line and the other Tennessee players than they were. But their offense is largely built right now on guys who hadn't proven it yet behind them, in wide receivers or running backs who are on the team, or transfers from Duke and App State. And they lost, we talked about before, they lost several offensive linemen. They had over 100 career starts at offensive line last year. So they had a veteran offensive line last year. This year, they're at 46 starts coming into the season. And they're looking to play. And look, we're in this situation too. We're all talking about is Juan Gaston going to play? Well, Juan Gaston is a true freshman, so we're talking about playing a true freshman. Well, they had the number 1 offensive line recruit in the country, in David Sanders, come in for this season. But they're, he hadn't played yet, but he's been injured. But they're hoping he's going to be in the game. tomorrow. So it's unclear whether he would start. Maybe he makes the game, but long story short, what I'm getting at is, look, they're counting on a true freshman, very talented guy. We would have absolutely taken. I mean, we would like to have been in the running for this guy. Okay, so this is a player we would have liked to have had, and that's one of the ways sometimes I'll rate it. Like, hey, would I rather have had their guy, Joey Aguilar? Would I rather we had Joey Aguilar as our quarterback, even though you've seen what he's done so far compared to what Gunner's done so far? No, I would not go in. I would not trade under any circumstances to have Joey Aguilar running our offense instead of Gunner Stockton. So when I look at their offense coming into this game, and everybody's like, well, Gunner, first game on the road. Well, you know what? It is Gunner's first game on the road, okay? And his first road game in the SEC. This is Joey Aguilar's first game in the SEC, period. And in 2 games against a couple of ACC teams in Clemson and North Carolina, he didn't even complete 50% of his passes. So, yeah, he was playing with App State then. So maybe he didn't have, again, the Tennessee players, right? But still, there's nothing about what we've seen from Joey Aguilar that makes us believe when the competition steps up that he's going to keep that offense at the same level. And we've already talked about when the Tennessee offense faces the Georgia defense, it doesn't keep the same level. They put up 500-600 yards a game against other teams, and especially lesser teams. And when they play Georgia, they're averaging 300 yards a game. They have yet to score over 17 points. Could they score over 17 points? Yeah. But right now, the idea where everybody's kind of just trended towards Tennessee and said, wow, they've looked great. Georgia's looked bad. I don't believe in Gunner. I'm not saying I believe in Gunner, and I'm not saying I don't believe in Tennessee. I'm just saying I have less reason, I think, to believe in Tennessee. Georgia's defense, the matchup there, is full of guys that are top-level recruits that have been on the team for 2 and 3 years, that are ascending now to the new position when other people have moved on beyond their eligibility or gone on to draft. They're not necessarily those household names yet, but they were top people that anybody in the country would have wanted, and they're performing exactly like they should, the way a Georgia defense should. Tennessee offense is performing exactly like it should against lesser competition, but it's being run right now with an inexperienced offensive line that they're hoping to get a true freshman offensive lineman in the game to help them. It's being run by a quarterback that nobody else at this level wanted when he was looking to transfer, who played at App State and has thrown 24 interceptions in 2 seasons starting at App State, and has never shown that he could beat a FBS high-level team. He could beat an FBS team, but not a high level. Now, he's never shown that he could even complete 50% or more of his passes against a top 25 team. And so that's the guy who's running. And you got 3 wide receivers. Their top 3 wide receivers are all newbies or people who not really even, these are not recruits and people that are at the same level of the guys they lost. So I guess is what I'm trying to say. Some of these guys are stepping in. They may turn out to be great wide receivers, but at the moment, they don't profile as being as talented as the guys who left. So they're putting up good numbers so far against that lesser competition. So what I'm saying is that key matchup, Tennessee offense, do I believe it or not? I think they're going to be a good offense on the season. I think they'll put up 450 yards. I think they'll score 35 points or so a game on the season. I think they'll play well. But is this the Tennessee offense with a transfer quarterback, a transfer running back from Duke, an App State quarterback, and newbie wide receivers, and an inexperienced offensive line? Is this the offense that you think is going to be the one that is not a mirage when they put up 600-700 yards against lesser competition? This time it's going to hold up when they play Georgia. Every other time the last 4 years under Josh Heupel, it's fallen apart when they play Georgia. But this time, this group of guys is going to be the one that, nope, these guys are going to light up Georgia. Is there reason to think that? Well, the Georgia defense, a lot of inexperienced guys. How do they look? Well, they're putting up the results that we would expect against the competition they've been playing against. So both their offense, our defense, have done what they should have done when you narrow it down so far in the season. But I just don't have, at this moment, I can't move with our bat. I'm not yet ready to predict the game or tell you exactly what's going to happen. But as we break this down, we get to tomorrow where we have the final predictions. I'm not ready to go to a place where I say, yeah, based on everything I just said, this is the Tennessee offense that's going to solve the Georgia defense. This is going to be this is finally the collection of people that Josh Heupel has assembled where he's like, I got it this time. This time we're going to we can outdo the athletic Georgia defense. I'm not feeling that. Okay. I'm not saying they can't win. Not saying they won't put up points. Maybe they are the first team to get over 20 points. Okay. Under Heupel against Georgia. It's entirely possible, but that may speak to other things that happen in the game less than it tells me. Nope, this is definitely what we've seen so far should give you a lot of reason for all the momentum to push towards Tennessee. The Georgia defense has been elite. Their offense has been elite. I believe more in the Georgia defense maintaining what it's shown so far than I believe in the Tennessee offense showing what it's shown so far. Got a lot of show notes still left to go through. This is meant to cover today and tomorrow because tomorrow we'll wrap it up and get to our predictions. So we talked about there being three key areas, and so far we've really only focused on one, meaning Tennessee offense versus Georgia defense, Georgia offense versus Tennessee defense, and then the special teams and the coaching and the intangibles. Those three key areas. So we've broken down one so far. We can get through the others, I think, a little quicker because we had to backtrack and talk about where is the Georgia defense. We can't just throw it out and say, well, the Georgia defense is always great. So we've admitted what the Georgia defense has been. Over the last 4 years. We've seen that erosion, but we actually think we're seeing the beginning of restoration. Right now, these guys are playing better, even against this competition, than they did last year. So that's encouraging. And that's all we have to go on so far. And as you've heard, probably famously, Kirby has emphasized, or the effort this year is to really focus on that defensive, especially with the fire, passion, and energy. And I think so far they have delivered. They have looked focused. They have shown fire, passion, energy. They play great. Now, the one thing they haven't done, they haven't created a lot of turnovers. They've only had one interception. And frankly, that was Austin Peay's fault. The quarterback threw the ball 900 miles an hour at a wide receiver who was like 15 yards away from him, and it bounced high off his hands and into the air. And Ellis Robinson did a great job of diving under it and catching it for the interception. So that was great. But we didn't really, I would feel better. I'd be more excited if it was like, oh, our pass rush got in there, tipped the ball, and then we intercepted it. They tipped it themselves. So thus far, we haven't seen a lot of turnover from the defense. That's maybe the big knock, I might say. And I know Kirby would like to see that. Kirby wants to create havoc. We want to see tackles for loss. We've seen a few sacks. We've seen 6 tackles for loss a game. We've seen a little bit of havoc, but we haven't seen the turnovers. So that's the one place you might be concerned. You'd say, well, it'd be nice to turn Tennessee over. But going back to what I said about Aguilar's 5 touchdowns, no interceptions so far this year, but that's not his profile as a starter. His profile as a starter is to throw 24 interceptions in 2 seasons as a starter at App State, or basically 12 a year. So, now's a good time to see that happen, for us to get some INTs and for him to throw them to us. So I'm going to go ahead and preview what we're going to talk about next podcast for tomorrow too. The other thing I like to do when breaking down a game and getting towards a prediction is we can look at, instead of just throwing out, I feel this, I think that, I feel this, I think the Georgia defense will be great this, I'm guessing, but I think they'll be great tomorrow. I think the Tennessee offense will not be as good tomorrow. Those are, I think, I feels. Okay. So when we look at, what's actually going to happen in the game, I always boil it down when I talk to everybody into 3 scenarios. There's basically 3 scenarios that can happen, right? Tennessee could blow Georgia out. Georgia could blow Tennessee out. Or it could be a 50-50 game, come down to the wire. Okay. Those are your 3 scenarios. So I will go ahead and say, what do I think about Tennessee blowing Georgia out? I don't think that's going to happen. Could they win the game? Yes. And look, I said this yesterday, but I believe a lot in Vegas. Not because I bet, because I don't, but I do follow the lines, and they are more right than anybody when you look at those lines. When you look at the over-unders, I didn't talk about that, the over-unders. The over-under on this game is very low, about 50 something. Okay, so they don't expect this to be a high-scoring game. They're looking at this as a 27-23 game. That's what Vegas thinks, because the over-under is around 50. So we score 27, they score 23, we win by 4. That would be right in line with where Vegas sees this game going, because Vegas has us up by 3.5 point favorite, and Vegas has the over under close to 50. So 27-23, either team, that's the most likely scenario according to Vegas. So what do I think? I'll break it down tomorrow because we're running short on time. I'm going to wrap up this podcast for today, and then we'll dig right back into this stuff. We'll just pick it up. It'll be like part two tomorrow. But I'll go ahead and say what I think. I don't see very many scenarios where this Tennessee team blows out Georgia because I think Georgia's defense, if nothing else, keeps them in the game, even if the offense bogs down. And I don't think Tennessee's offense is going to run up and down the field on this Georgia defense, even if they score, even if they get over 20, even if they get 27 and we get 23, and that's the way it goes. That's a more likely scenario. So I would almost entirely rule out Tennessee blows out Georgia, and I think the 50-50 scenario, coin flip game, that's your most likely scenario at this moment. I think that makes a lot of sense based on where both teams are. And we'll break that down some more tomorrow too. And then the other option was Georgia blows out Tennessee. And I think that's much more of a possibility than Tennessee blowing out Georgia. Now, again, big Georgia homer. Look at all the stuff back here, right? Okay. Oh, sorry, hit the mic again. So obviously, I mean, if you could see that, if you're not, this may get introduced as my first video podcast. I'm not sure if I'm running the video, but I don't know if it's going to work that way. So we'll see. But so I just referenced or gestured to the wall behind me, which is covered with Georgia paraphernalia. So if you could see it, it's covered with Georgia paraphernalia. I'm wearing a Georgia hat and a Georgia shirt. So, I'm obviously big Georgia homer. Okay. And it's hard for me to see past the Georgia perspective. I am not, I guess there's two kinds of fans in every fan base. There's the fan who's like, everything's always bad. No, we'll probably lose this game. Quarterback probably throw 5 interceptions. We probably can't even, complete a forward pass. That's one perspective. And you hear that fan all the time. They still go to every game. They cheer. They put on all their gear. They have stuff all around their house, decorating the house. But that's how they talk. Okay. Well, I'm not that guy. I'm the guy who's, always like the sunny side. And I'm not really I'm not really an optimist in life. People who know me would tell you I'm not that optimistic, but I just want so much for our team to succeed and be great and everybody to shower us with accolades. I guess it's just hard for me to see if it comes down to 50-50. I generally am going to think, no, I think it favors. I mean, I'll try to be as realistic as I can and as honest as I can, and I try to be. But so my point is I don't see that this Tennessee offense, like I said, running up and down the field on Georgia. So I don't see how Tennessee blows us out. Even if we have a couple turnovers, I think the most that would do is give them the chance to score over 20 and win the game, not blow us out. So, but do I think the other scenario is possible? Do I think that Gunner is way better than we think he is, or that he's shown so far? Do I think the Georgia offense is way better than it's shown so far? I think that's a distinct possibility. Do I think the Tennessee defense is not able to stop even this Georgia offense that has not looked super dynamic? I think that's a possibility. Could we also turn them over and put them in bad situations and get some easy points? I think we could. Do we have a weapon now at punt and kick return that we haven't had the last couple of years and get a freebie touchdown or some easy yardage that makes the game easier to score? Yeah, we've seen him. Zachariah Branch looks dangerous. Okay. So I think there's several reasons that we could be in a scenario where we could blow them out. Do I think that's the likely scenario? No, I don't think so. Right now, I've got numbers on my show notes written here. I think the chance that Tennessee blows us out is 10% or less. I think the chance that we blow out Tennessee, 30% or less. And that's a big come down. So that's me saying, I definitely see what other people see, that this is going to be a closer game than other games, or could be, because we have blown them out. Like I said yesterday, the average score of the last 4 Georgia-Tennessee games. No, I'm sorry. The average score of the 8-game losing streak Tennessee has against us is 38-13. Okay, so they haven't even been competitive games. They've all been blowouts. It's a 25-point average loss. So I think it shows that I'm being very expecting that Tennessee and Georgia, the gap might be smaller this year than other years. When I say there's only a 30% chance that Georgia blows Tennessee out in this game, other people may say, well, you're just Georgia homer. That's ridiculous. Or where are you getting that? Well, again, for 8 years, we've averaged 25-point victories. So I think I'm being pretty reasonable. So that leaves the 50-50 scenario, coin flip. Game could go either way. I think there's a 60% chance is what I'm putting it at. I penciled in 60% chance that that's the way it goes. So 10% Tennessee blows us out, 30% that we blow Tennessee out, 60% that it's a coin flip game. And if it's a coin flip game, I can tell you that, again, right now, I'm probably leaning that Georgia is the team that has the intangibles, the better experience, the better coaching record in these games, a lot of different things. Maybe not right now the quarterback that you think is the guy who's going to go in there and light it up. But on every other front, right now, I'd have to go with Georgia if it's a coin flip, if it's a 50-50 game. So we're going to break that down a little bit more tomorrow. So we're going to go back and look at those other matchups. We're going to get into detail about our offense and the Tennessee defense and where they are right now and how we think that'll play out. We're going to talk about the coaching and the intangibles. We'll look back at, how these games have flowed a little bit and what does it tell us about this game and what can we tell from these things. I mentioned yesterday that I think that the more I've been thinking about it, I sort of look for comparisons, and I think that the 2019 Georgia team is a good comparison. We're going to get into that. We're not doing that today, but we'll get into that a little bit. And I do want to correct something yesterday. I stumbled. I couldn't believe it. Later, I thought to myself, and I just didn't want to take the time to edit it. I want to get these podcasts out, so I didn't edit out the flubs. So you get to live with my imperfections. I actually could not remember when the conference expanded in 1992 and created the East and West, who the other team was. I knew South Carolina came in on our side and then helped form the East. And I was like, who's the other team? Was it Texas A&M? I was struggling to remember. It was Arkansas. I mean, you probably knew that, or you might have looked it up when you heard me fumble on it. But it popped up like just after we recorded. And I was like, wow, what an idiot. I couldn't remember it was Arkansas. So then it was then the second expansion was when then Missouri and Texas A&M came in. And so Missouri came into the East and A&M went into the West. And then now we've had the Texas and Oklahoma expansion, and now we no longer have East and West when we brought those teams in. So those have been the three expansions. I want to correct the record on that because I brought that up yesterday, and you probably know all that, but I still felt the need to say it. So just getting through the show notes real quick. Yeah, well, we'll get into it. We're going to talk a little bit more about our offense and what we think we can see from them, what Gunnar did. We're going to look a little bit more at those 4-year records and some of the details about what these teams have done against each other. And we'll wrap it up with what we think the prediction is. So you may hear me leaning towards Georgia, and I probably am. I mean, again, I just gave scenario where 60% chance of a coin flip, 30% chance Georgia blows Tennessee out, only 10% chance Tennessee blows out. So if the coin flip just goes 30-30, then now you got, Georgia's in the lead on the mathematical percentages, the way I broke it up, that Georgia could win. So I'm leaning that Georgia goes that way, but I haven't made a final prediction yet. And I really, truly feel the butterflies. I don't know what's going to happen. So, and I don't know for sure what I'm going to predict or what the final score will be. I'm starting to get an idea, but I will give that to you tomorrow. So have a great night or an early tomorrow. If you're listening to this tomorrow, I hope you have enough time to listen to both podcasts back to back. I will be back in the morning, so you have time to hear this before the game tomorrow. And until then, well, you know what I say. It's go Dogs. Sick 'em. Woof, woof, woof.